word, and a word I find absolutely beautiful and I aspire to use on a daily basis. This 4-letter word is a word that I use with my wife, with my children, and with my friends. When I first started using this word, everyone would look at me and say, oh my goodness, what is going on here? How can you use such a word? As I started using it more and more, they then came to understand the context from which I would use it and say, very interesting. And they embraced it themselves and they started using it. They started using it around their children. I now find myself in a very interesting situation in that I'm in a position where I'm paid to use that F word around children. Children as young as 5 and 6 years old. Pretty interesting. So, let's take a good look at this 4-letter F word. I'm going to show it to you on the screen right here. Ready, guys? 3, 2, 1. There it is. The word fail in all its glory. Seriously though, the word fail and a variant of its form, namely failure, is a word that society typically shuns. When you think about our society, we look at winners. We look at people who win at competitions. We look at people that go out, they accomplish great things in life, and they actually go out and change the world. Here's a list of 4 of these individuals. Top one being Steve Jobs, true game changer, co-founder of Apple Computers. You look at the second name on our list, Walt Disney. There's someone that we all know. Disney World, Disneyland, Disney Films, Mickey Mouse. Steven Spielberg, one of the most influential and important filmmakers in American history, and of course, entrepreneur extraordinaire Elon Musk of Tesla and SpaceX fame, as well as a host of other companies as well. All of these individuals listed here are true game changers, and they've achieved massive success. What's also very interesting, though, is these individuals, these game changers, also have another set of accomplishments, which I've listed here on the left. What we are going to do is go ahead and map these accomplishments on the left with the game changers on the right-hand side. We'll do so one by one. I will say ahead of time, though, that the accomplishments on the left can be mapped to more than one of these game changers. So let's start straight up from the top. Rejected 3 times from the same university. Who would that be? Steven Spielberg, actually. He was rejected 3 times back to back to back from USC Film School. Supervisor made mention of this to this individual, saying he's not creative enough. Who is that? Walt Disney. Walt Disney was told at his first job in an animation house by his supervisor, the editor, he was not creative enough. Fired once from a job. Well, this glorious feat happens to be associated with 3 of these game changers. Let's start with Walt Disney, because that's the name I just mentioned. That same editor that told him he wasn't creative enough, that editor was the first one to fire him as well. Steve Jobs, we all know of Apple fame. I think he was fired from his role as CEO, came back later on, of course. Elon Musk, also fired from a company that he started. The name of that company is removed as CEO, it was X2, and he started that in his early days. Now, the crowning achievement on this page happens to be being fired twice. Who does this belong to? Well, in fact, it's Elon Musk. In addition to being removed as CEO of X2, he was also removed as CEO from another company called PayPal. So we have a very interesting set of, we have 2 different focal points of great interest here. On the one side, we have individuals that we absolutely as a society aspire to be. We have these 4 individuals I mentioned before. By the same token, we have a list of people, in this case exactly the same people, that achieved significant failures. If I would not be showing you their names on the right-hand side, I guarantee if I just showed you their accomplishments from the prior page, you would all agree that likely these would be failures. Well, this brings to heart one of the core things that so many entrepreneurs, so many people come to talk about, and that is the importance of failure. So many of these individuals here and countless other entrepreneurs always say that failure is at the heart of success. But what does that really mean? Does that mean we should just go out and fail? Should I, as I'm walking across the stage, should I just trip, fall and hit myself? No, it doesn't make any sense to do that. We have to be thoughtful about how we fail. Actually, there's 2 different paths of failure that I'm going to outline. one of which has no relevance whatsoever, and it's called failing thoughtlessly. When you fail thoughtlessly, that's when you're not really pursuing something in earnest. So for example, suppose I go and I take a test, I don't study for it, and I fail outright. I get nothing right, right? Well, what's the point there? I didn't study for it. We all know the reason why I failed. Had I studied, I would have passed. That's not really being true to yourself, and that's called failing thoughtlessly. The other path, though, is the one of importance, and that's the one that I'm going to be advocating and discussing here, and that is failing thoughtfully. Failing thoughtfully is really when you are earnestly trying to solve a problem or complete a task at hand. When you try to do something out, and many times when you're failing thoughtfully, you're trying to do something in an environment which you don't really have familiarity with. So what that means is you try something out. As you try that thing out, you may not get things right on the first try. It happens all the time. But what do? If you're really earnest about achieving success there, you're going to take a step back. Look at that problem or task you're going to do. You're going to see what you did, try to understand, okay, well, I anticipated it was going to do X, Y, Z, and instead, what happens is it did A, B, C. So let me course correct and try it again. Second time you may not get it right, but you keep repeating the cycle until you do get it right. Well, that's called failing thoughtfully. You achieve success, but you fail thoughtfully. In doing so, you derive 3 benefits. First benefit is related to enhanced problem-solving skill sets. That comes about because you've had the opportunity to exercise the process that I just mentioned. Second benefit, the attainment of very core and desirable traits. These things include diligence, perseverance, passion, commitment, focus, and quite honestly, a little dose of humility, which is good when you're trying something out and perhaps you don't fail the first time. The third key benefit that you get from failing thoughtfully is something incredibly important, and that is an enhancement to your confidence level. When you're working in ambiguous situations where you don't really know the answer, you do something, perhaps you don't get it right, but eventually you do, of course you feel better about yourself. You're like, gosh, I succeeded in something. Your confidence level increases, and another side benefit is that your perhaps risk-taking appetite increases as well. So that's what I'm really here to talk to you about, failing thoughtfully. So now we come back to the original question that I posed, and that really is, okay, if this is so important, if so many game changers talk about failing and failing thoughtfully, where is this really learned? Where can we learn this kind of process? Well, in our current society, it's a bit challenging. Obviously, education stems from schools. I happen to be a huge proponent of schools, so I want to get that off my chest right off the bat. I currently partner with a number of educators. I currently partner with a number of administrators, superintendents, all types of educational entities. So I hold schools and the teachers in the highest possible regards. But what I think the focus of schools are these days is really to impart to our children how to understand how the world works. In that regard, schools teach our students key principles. They do this through teaching them subject matter knowledge. This knowledge is imparted through classrooms. Schools seek to work with our children about the known world. Understandably, they prepare our students to understand the world. Oftentimes, though, when students leave schools, what happens is they enter what I'll call the post-school era. In their what happens, or a post-school environment, they're no longer asked to understand the world, they're asked to change the world. Changing the world is far different from understanding the world. Here, all of a sudden, you're now immersed in absolutely ambiguous situations where you're provided problems that need to be solved. And those problems don't necessarily have known solutions. So what do you have to do? Well, unlike before, you now have to generate types of solutions. You have to create ideas. You need to bring those ideas to life. It's inherently not something you've learned before. The way in which you do so is you take a multidisciplinary approach. All throughout our schooling, what we used to do was a subject-based approach. We learned massive amounts of things such as math, science, and the other topical areas I mentioned. Now we need to figure out how to put it all together and achieve a multidisciplinary approach to the problem we're trying to solve. And a key difference is we're really working with an unknown. As an example, let me give you this. When we do these wonderful science experiments in school, and I have 2 wonderful boys, so I love hearing about the science experiments that they do. Even if perhaps they don't get the answer right, we know what the answer should be, and that helps guide the process. It's far different when you're in the change the world phase there. You get an answer, it's always right. You just need to figure out how to interpret it and figure out what to do next. So there's a large gap here between understanding the world and changing the world. This was actually a dilemma that myself and several of my colleagues were facing back in around the 2013-2014 timeframe. During that time, I was happily immersed in the field of information, which is all about the transformation of ideas into something of value. At the time, I was leading innovation development for a rather large company, and I would talk with my colleagues because we had this fundamental issue at hand. We were recruiting heavily from some of the top colleges around the world. What we were finding is that the mindsets and capabilities of the students that those colleges and universities were churning out were a bit misaligned from what was really needed to succeed in the field of innovation. No fault of anyone, there was just a misalignment there. So we used to talk for hours, my colleagues and I, how can we fix this? Our approach, since we were at a corporation, was to instill all these training programs, mentorship programs, internship programs, all this stuff. Regardless of every effort we would do, it would take roughly a year to get someone up to speed to function in the world of innovation, because in innovation, you're really working with the unknown. I was carrying these thoughts with me when I got a spark, and that spark was provided by my then 8-year-old son, Ravi. One day, I was eating lunch with Ravi, and we had a really thoughtful discussion. I asked him the typical question a parent would ask, which would be, hey, how's school going? He responded, Dad, school's going great, but I don't really like mathematics. And I was like, really? And that really, just so you know, it really deeply saddened me. I'm an electrical engineer by training, and math was one of my favorite subjects. And I said, well, what's wrong, Rubs? And he said, Dad, it's just, I do well, I understand, I get it, but I don't know where I can use it. And so I told him, I said, well, Rubs, you love mathematics, let me show you a different way to apply this. Let's, when we go home, let's design a video game. And we went through different types of game types and things like that. He got extremely excited and asked numerous questions, and I answered them one by one. The last question that he asked me was that one that sparked something in me that, for me, transformed my world. My 8-year-old son asked me, Dad, when we do this, can I have my friends come over? And I go, your friends? They would be interested in something like this? He goes, Dad, my friends would love something like this. Right after that call, right after that lunch, I got home and I called my now business partner, Gil Levin. Gil and I live across the street from each other, and though we were working in different corporations, we'd always been talking about startups. He's from Silicon Valley, and I had been in 3 previous startups myself. And I said, Gil, I dropped him an email. I said, Gil, do you have time to meet tomorrow? I have this idea which I think could amount to something. Let's chat. Gil and I got together the next day, ended up being a multi-hour conversation. It was something that was truly memorable in my life. It really helped to change everything. What I discussed with Gil and what we formulated together was developing an environment or an organization that would really allow children the opportunity to apply what they learn in school. So if somebody's learning math, science, whatever, we would put together projects that would allow children to emphasize their learnings. Now, the focus of our organization would be strictly and primarily on problem solving. So in this regard, what does that mean? That would mean children would be posed specific problems to solve. Children then had to come out and develop solutions, options on how to solve that problem. They had to outline pros and cons of this. They had to then provide a recommendation back to us. And then you know what? They had to develop a game plan that would allow them to implement their problem. All of this, though, we decided was not to be done as a paper exercise. No, they had to create something using a combination of their minds and their hands. So what this means to us is we said this needs to take place in what is now known as a makerspace. In that makerspace, we would accessorize it to incorporate a variety of 21st century tool sets with traditional tool sets. So that means that children would be allowed to combine capabilities from next generation types of environments with traditional types of environments. So by that I mean they would be able to do digital design using computer-aided design. They'd be doing digital fabrication with laser cutters, CNC milling machines, 3D printers. They'd use electronics, they'd use coding, they'd use app development. All these things combined with the beauty of traditional making, skills such as crafting, artwork, woodworking, things like that to really go about solving the problem. In closing out that conversation, I looked at my notes actually 2 days ago, this was interesting. These were the notes that came out, and guiding principles for us as we decided to move next. We said, the things we really need to do that we aspire to do as an organization, number one, spark creativity within the children. Number two, sharpen problem-solving skills. Number three, foster innovation, that transformation of ideas into value. All in a thoughtful and nurturing, failing environment, because we knew that that was of critical importance to our children. The one thing I want to add, I'll say it outright, both Gil and myself were very, very passionate about not churning out the next generation of engineers. That was never our focus, and I guarantee you it never will be our focus. Our focus has always been around churning out the next generation of problem solvers and game changers. So, what did we do then? Well, what we did is we decided to take the first step and try out some pilot projects. Gil and I at the time had full-time jobs, and we decided, okay, well, let's rent out space in community centers around the area. We ran our very first project, which was called Robotic Band. The problem that the kids, there were 12 kids in this class, it was a 5-week class. The children had to solve the problem, how can I make a music maker that plays an instrument and that I can control to play a song with other students in the class? You can see a materials list and just a game plan outlined by one of the individuals here. And all the children that you see here, it was very interesting. They all were given different instruments to play, and they all were given different parts in which to create robots that would play these things. None of these kids had any effort or knowledge before of coding, building, anything of that nature. By the end of that 5 weeks, they all devised robots that could play those instruments, and we played Mary Had a Little Lamb. We did a couple more pilot projects similar to that, and interest and demand started growing for our services. Parents spoke to us and said, hey, you guys should really form a company. At the same time, what was interesting is people came to us and said, hey, do you guys need funding? So we had a level of funding that was there. We had a product that seemed to be of interest, and we felt, both of us, that we were doing something to really change humanity for the better. So we should just move straight forward and go and start the company, right? Well, not so much so. This is where the whole notion of defying gravity comes into play. What I've drawn here, playfully, is something that physicists and engineers call a Freebody Diagram. In my case, there are 4 forces pulling me down. These are like the forces of gravity. First one were expectations, second is security, third is geography, fourth is fear, in this case of failure. I wanted to go forth and try to conquer, but these 4 forces were balancing against it. Expectations, in my case, PhD, MBA, I'd risen to a senior executive role at companies, and I think the expectation, I knew it was there, from parents, friends, others, that I would continue along that path. Security, that one's probably easy to understand. Again, my wife and I were leading a very comfortable lifestyle. We're happy with where we were, and if I were to start a new company, it would all go away. Third one, geography. A large part of what we were doing was high-tech in nature. So there was significant pull from West Coast and East Coast investors. In the Chicago area, though, not so much so. And then fourth was the fear of failure. That speaks for itself. Thankfully, though, we decided to break free and actually move forward. As we did, we started a very hands-on company in February 2016 called Tickerworks. These are just examples of 3 types of projects we ran there. First one is called Mighty Kite. We did that with 7 to 9-year-olds. Problems they were trying to solve is how can we build a beautiful kite that not only flies, but tells the kite flyer how high it's flying. Second one called Pampered Plant. 9 to 11 years old, that was a 12-week project. That was all about solving the problem around how can we design a plant monitoring system that allows plants the opportunity to survive and thrive in the harsh winters of Chicago. And the last one on this page happens to be something called Hack-O-Lantern. Again, for 9 to 11-year-olds, how can we make a jack-o'-lantern that we can bring to life through music and sound? Lastly, I'd just like to share this number with you. It's been 2.5 years since we started. We're now at 1,700 plus students engaged with our company. We have after-school programs at over 20 or 25 schools at this point. Gil and I just got back from Vietnam, as there's a large system out there, school system, that's asked to license our STEM curriculum. We're partnering with a number of schools right now in terms of development of STEAM curriculum to help them allow their students to apply what they learn as part of their educational curriculum. And we were just voted as one of Chicago's most inspiring companies. Before I leave today, I want to show you a picture, just snapshots of some of the next generation problem solvers I believe will truly go out and change the world. Our focus will always be to immerse children in nurturing and safe environments where we thoughtfully teach them to use the F word to succeed. Thank you.